On Poland Today, we talk to investors and people with a long track record in Poland. I'm your host, David Kennedy. Today's guest had a distinguished military career, rising to the rank of general in the infantry of the British Army, before moving into a career in the defence industry. Peter Rafferty is now the president of Galvion UK and oversees the production of personal combat equipment in Gdańsk in the north of Poland. Peter, thank you very much for joining us here in Poland today.
David, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and chat with you.
So, Peter, you've had a long career serving overseas in many different places. Has it been quite as hot anywhere else that you've been as it's been in Poland this week? 41 degrees at some points.
Well, I only arrived in Poland on Monday into a very balmy 30 plus in Gdańsk. But yes, I had a fairly standard British military career over the last 30, 40 years. With some experiences in much warmer climes.
Much warmer climes?
Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Africa. So most of the hotspots over the last 30, 40 years.
And of course, during that time, you've also come across quite a lot of Polish military people. You've seen some of Poland, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go on in the show, and we'll hear maybe some of your secrets about what makes Poland work in terms of its military. But first of all, what brings you to Poland today?
So this week, I'm over on a fairly routine visit to see the team in Gdańsk, but specifically also to come to Warsaw today to celebrate Canada Day with the Canadian Embassy team and all of our Polish supporters.
Right, and that's because your company is a Canadian company? That's
correct. We're a privately owned Canadian headquartered company with subsidiaries in US, UK, and of course here in Poland.
Now, you sell helmets. Yeah, these are just made of tin and just get plopped on the head, or what are they exactly?
Well, I can tell you, David, when I first joined the Army in 1981, we had exactly that, which was a tin helmet. I think the first one I had was a 1944 vintage item. But I'm delighted to say that these days, combat helmets for soldiers are far more advanced. They fall perhaps into two categories. There is what people understand to be Kevlar, which is a trade name that many may be familiar with, or aramid as we call it, which is a textile. And helmet shells these days are often made of that material. But that material really began in the 1980s, and in the last 10 years or so, Galvion in particular, we have specialized in even more advanced materials. Long title, but ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene.
Right, and what's the difference if you have another material?
The material we mostly use, we still do make aramid helmets, but we mostly make polyethylene for most of our NATO and wider customers, largely because the performance levels you can attain are higher, but also, and critically, you attain those higher levels of performance, but at a much lower weight. So an average aramid helmet, which is still in relatively common use, can be as heavy as 1.6, even 1.8 kilograms. But generally speaking, a polyethylene helmet will be around the 1 kilogram mark.
Okay, so you're carrying around an awful lot less. Now, in the context of, I suppose, the politics that have been happening in Poland over the last year or two, military spending has been increasing. What are you seeing countries throughout the world spending more on these days?
Generally, certainly in terms of the market space that we operate on, most armies, particularly again in NATO, and most of our customers are NATO members, they are investing heavily in individual soldier equipment. So we have received significant orders, many of which are being satisfied out of our Gdańsk facility for the newer NATO members. and they are upgrading everybody to the polyethylene helmets because they are lighter, and I'll explain shortly, if you like, why that's so important. But we're not just a helmet company. We are also an integrated soldier system solution company. So whilst, yes, a lot of our business today is what might be termed purely protective helmet systems, we are now launching into the area of integrated helmet systems with computing on the head, centralized power on the back of the helmet that powers other devices that are fixed to the helmet. Or in our case, we just launched the world's first fully integrated helmet, where all of the wiring and cabling for the power is embedded inside the helmet. And that powers things like night vision systems, laser warning receivers, active noise reduction hearing protection, and indeed head-up displays, believe it or not, for the combat soldier.
Right. So, say for example, somewhere in Ukraine at the moment, have they had the budget to put that kind of equipment on their soldiers' heads? And if what kind of difference can it make to the soldier on the field?
I'll go back to the weight budget. So the human head, no matter how large the neck is, generally can cope with around 2 kilograms of weight in combat situations. And so reducing the weight of the helmet shell from around 1.8 to around 1 kilogram or less means we've now created a weight budget against which we can integrate these devices more comfortably and more stably. And so night vision devices that go on the front of the helmet and then obviously drop to the eyes, they can be quite heavy still. But if you remove the power source and put it on the back of the helmet, if you add some basic processing and computing to integrate into those night vision and head-up display systems, useful battlefield information, navigation, targeting, those kinds of things, the overall burden on the soldier, the overall burden meaning the entire weight of the capability he needs to carry, you can bring down. And for operators, this is particularly critical.
Are the Russians also investing in this kind of equipment, or are they way behind at the moment, or what's the kind of, or is that top secret?
I would say, just purely based on open source information, everybody across the globe is looking to invest in this kind of capability. It is more expensive, particularly the more advanced night vision systems, which we don't make, but we do integrate them into our system. But it's fair to say that our opponents, be they Russian or any other potential adversaries, are all where they can investing in this capability. And particularly in Ukraine, as we're seeing with the battlefield becoming much more dislocated, much more isolated, much more dominated by the newer technologies of drones, be they aerial or ground-based, the individual soldier's situational awareness, his understanding of the position he finds himself in on the battlefield, what is going on around him, and his ability to sustain that in isolation for longer is becoming very key. And power, batteries fundamentally, is the key to that success. And it is both reducing the amount of power devices require, but also providing sufficient self-sufficiency for the soldier to manage his power almost as if it was food, fuel, ammunition. And we provide a range of options, whether it be soldier batteries, power management systems. We also provide software and apps that allows a soldier to plan for his battery consumption against the devices that he needs to operate. And this level of prior planning and intelligence around a soldier's individual performance on the battlefield, we are seeing evidence coming from every current conflict, not just Ukraine, that this is the way the future needs to be, that individual soldiers have to be much more capable, much more connected to the wider network, have a much better understanding of their environment and exactly what's going on around them, and be able to communicate both what they are involved in and understand what others are involved in order to make faster decisions and to therefore become more survivable.
Right, so the soldier is on the battlefield and he's getting visual displays, he's getting information coming through the radio, he's getting information maybe from about the location of his opponents. He's getting all this, but he could be a little bit like a teenager doing his homework, that there's just too much information.
That's exactly it. And there have been many experiments over the last 35 years or so amongst most of the leading militaries, again, particularly in NATO, to try and deliver these integrated soldier systems that really do tailor what the soldier sees and hears and understands for every given situation. If he is not physically in contact with the enemy, then clearly you can present more information to allow him to plan better, to understand better. But once they are engaged in that close contact fight, the tailoring of the menus of information that he can scroll through his battle management system or his little tablet-based computer, and then we can project into the eye, is really only the information he needs, which is usually simply where he is, where his friends are, and where the enemy is.
And how quickly do we have to actually react to this burst of technological growth? Are we seeing that, for example, people who or companies which have direct, shall we say, experience of their technology being used on the battlefield are maybe beating the rest of the field?
Certainly, users across the alliance are very keen on battle-proven equipment. And we mentioned drones earlier, the ability now for the individual soldier to integrate at least the small handheld drones into that battle picture, as we call it, that we present to him, is becoming critical. And as this information flow really expands to include not just the small handheld drones or hand-controlled drones that you see on much of the footage, but also to access the information from the larger, higher-flying drones and systems, and then the ability to simply understand what is that actually going to mean for that soldier on that part of the battlefield. That's the critical thing. And so many of these systems, particularly the drone integration, are being trialed and experimented all the time, both in the peacetime training areas, but also, as you mentioned, our Ukrainian comrades in particular are evolving and learning very rapidly how best to employ these systems.
Now, we hear all of these stories about drone operators, about geeks having a major role on the battlefield.
I think there are 2 points I'd make. One is that inevitably there is a myth that prevails still, sadly, that the younger generation, the younger soldier today, you'll often hear people claim is not as good as his forebears. That is simply not correct. And I think it's fair to say that all of our soldiers in all of our allied armies, particularly across NATO, are evolving and growing with the technology. And to accuse them of being less capable, less resilient, less aware of how it will be on a battlefield, I think is a myth. What they do bring, however, which is where they are much more advanced than even my generation, is they are much more technically aware. As you said, they grow up sometimes being accused of being geeks in terms of their computer wargaming and digital skills generally. But those are now the skills that are highly prized within the military at any level. And we are finding for sure that our younger soldiers easily adapt to these systems. And critically, and for a company like Galvion, where we spend a lot of our time talking to, experimenting, trialing equipment with young soldiers, we're finding that they pick this stuff up very easily. And they offer great advice how to manipulate or change the design, and particularly the human interface, that will allow that soldier to operate this equipment much more efficiently, much quicker, and therefore be in a position to make faster decisions. And on the battlefield at any level, frankly, it is all about who makes the faster decisions, you or the enemy.
And of course, your company, you've decided that you'll have your production base, or one of the major production bases, in Gdańsk, northern Poland. Beautiful town, of course. But what else decided about you coming to Gdańsk? You've been here over the years, of course.
Yes, I first visited Poland in the late 90s. when I was stationed in Germany with the British Army, and we brought the brigade to the Drazko-Pomorsky area in western Pomerania to train. That really was my first true exposure to Poland and to the Polish military. And you mentioned earlier, what are the characteristics I would cite for the Polish military? I think the first thing I would say is the British military and the Polish military have a long heritage together, going all the way back, particularly to the Second World War. And I think there is a lot of mutual trust and mutual respect between our two militaries, because from a military perspective, we're very similar characters.
Why is that?
It's the Polish character of resilience, the Polish character of can-do, whether it be the Polish deployments to Iraq or Afghanistan, those theaters. There was a lot of common understanding of how to operate and what needs to be done to be successful. And so then over the years since that first visit in the early, or in 1999, I've come across the Polish military in Iraq, Afghanistan, as I've mentioned, but also I've trained quite significant number of times with them here in Eastern Europe or in the Baltic states, alongside Polish formations, Polish-Lithuanian battalions in Lithuania, elsewhere in Estonia. And I think over the years, as the modern day Poland has sought to integrate itself fully, and such that it's now central to the NATO effort. The UK has been proud to be stood alongside Polish soldiers. British soldiers love working with the Poles. And I think a lot of it is that shared character of resilience and the ability to get things done.
Right, and that ability to get things done, so not necessarily waiting for the perfect conditions, for the perfect equipment, for the perfect order in a way. You've got a task to do and get it done. Is that?
That's very much it. And so when the company began its consideration of setting up a European Union-based manufacturing hub, and I stress right now our facility in Gdansk is largely manufacturing helmets, but that is merely the first stage.
Now, tell me, because there's a lot of talk now about the so-called eastern flank of NATO, connecting countries up as far as Finland and Sweden, right down, I suppose, towards Ukraine as well and beyond. How important a buzzword will that be over the next few years?
It is extremely important. And the main driver to be here, particularly here in Pomerania, to have access to the Baltic ports, airports, land communications, was very important for us, because we have a great deal of business in the Scandinavian states, in Germany, and in the region here, the Baltic states included. And much of our supply chain is European. So yes, we are a Canadian-owned company, and we have facilities also in the United States, but largely at the moment we are seeking and almost completely replicating our supply chains between North America and an entirely European base.
And why is that important?
Regionalization is, you mentioned buzzwords, regionalization is an increasing buzzword in the industry.
Nearshoring.
Nearshoring, onshoring, or friendshoring, as some would have it.
Getting rid of Chinese components?
It's not relying on Chinese or Far Eastern components and lengthy supply chains. Some of this, of course, was highlighted by the COVID emergency and some of the disruption that found because of the long distance supply chains. Some of it, frankly, is security of supply and ensuring that we place our supply chains where access is guaranteed. And some of it, frankly, and every nation, Poland included, is really adopting the mantra that where possible, military equipment that is now increasingly attracting larger budgets should be procured regionally at the least, or nationally, domestically, if at all possible. And so what we've sought to build and are continuing to build in Gdansk is a European hub, both for manufacture, for repair, overhaul, and soon development, but also with an associated supply chain. So whilst much of our supply chain currently is in UK, in the Balkans, in other parts of Europe, we are also in the process of sourcing Polish suppliers that can supply components, material, and so on.
So free of Chinese components?
That is the drive, is to ensure that the supply chain distances are kept to the minimum. And as we're seeing in conflicts like Ukraine, with Gaza and elsewhere, shortening those supply chains, having the ability to move from the front line to what the military call fourth line, i.e. the factory level of maintenance and support, that is becoming quite important and will become ever so important again as we go through the next 20, 30 years. The next
20, 30 years, but over this period that you have been involved in Poland and with the Polish military, if you could think of a kind of a pivot point, what would that time be when you really saw things changing in Poland?
From a personal perspective, it was perhaps a little later, because of course, having come here in the 99-2000 period, post the change from the previous communist regime, obviously it was fairly obvious even at that early stage that Poland was transforming, that the Polish military was transforming, and that drive and energy that the Polish military showed even 25, 26 years ago to really integrate fully and become a full partner in the NATO alliance was self-evident even to me at that time. But I think the pivot really was almost nearly 5 years ago when I first came to Poland with a business eye. So I had visited Poland several times in between on holidays, but it was really when I came here with a business eye in 2021, early 2022, and began to consider, well, if we set up in Poland, where would that be? And whilst in my mind's eye from day one, I felt the broader Pomerania area was the obvious choice, given it would be at the center of mass of our customer base in northern, western, and Scandinavia. It was really seeing how far Poland had come as a society, as a military, as a place to do business and invest, with the huge advances in infrastructure that we've seen, whether that be land infrastructure, air or seaport. And really from almost day one, our chairman and I agreed that Poland was a likely place, and within Poland, Pomerania was the best choice. But even within that, we did search and research far and wide across the region, and we had terrific support. As a Canadian-owned company, our first port of call was the Canadian Embassy and the trade team here in Warsaw. The Canadian ambassador here, Madam Catherine, she has been absolutely brilliant and supportive. And we had a lot of support from many, many Polish authorities at the national level, with the Polish Trade and Investment Agency, and regionally for each voivodeship, we engaged heavily with all of their trade teams. So this was not a solo journey by the company by any means. We had huge support and accompaniment by Polish experts. And we were shown many alternatives as far west as Szczecin, Gorz, Koszalin, even southeast of Poland. But I think it would be fair to say that the minute we visited Gdansk, we saw the ecosystem we would become part of in terms of communications, transportation, networks.
A large port, of course.
A large port. But I think the thing, to really answer your question, I think what really swung it for us in Gdansk's favor was the enthusiastic workforce we encountered, the technical universities, because as we evolve our footprint here in Poland, we are going to need access to the kinds of youngsters we were talking about earlier, technically capable, technically trained, and the technical universities and the workforce in the Gdansk area sold itself to us, really. So although Gdansk happened to be almost the final option that we explored, it very rapidly became the option.
And now a final question, which is maybe a rather tough question, but much of the, shall we say, the leap forward in the Polish economy has been due to the ability to invest, the ability to provide infrastructure, to provide consumer goods which were not available. Some people say that this is because of the peace dividend. We are moving very quickly away from the era of the peace dividend. What will this mean for the Polish economy?
I think there are broad levels of understanding across Western European NATO and NATO in general that we face some unprecedented potential threats, clearly Russia being the most likely in the near term. And I think whether you are in defense industry, in government, in the military, or in any defense-associated ecosystem, such as defense academia and the universities, I think all of those members of all of our societies understand this, that there is a potential threat and we need to do more to be prepared to deter it, ideally, or to deal with it should it become real. I think some countries are better at, beyond that group of people, making the general populace understand the situation we find ourselves in. And I think Poland, the Baltic states, Scandinavian states, and many others are clear across their populations that more money has to be spent on defense. There are still other countries, I think, who are still on that journey and are winning that debate. And as we're seeing everywhere, putting more money into defense. Poland, I think, given obviously its geographic position and its position as one of the bulwarks of defense on the eastern flank, is clearly doing more than most. And so there will have to be a balancing in all of our economies. There will have to be access to better financial models and financial vehicles to fund this quite rapid expansion. And I think Poland is doing a very good job at that. They are in the European safe funding access. And as you will have seen, I'm sure, on the news recently, ministers here have awarded contracts to get that process moving. And we believe Galvion can play a part. We are not here to compete with some of the state-owned manufacturing facilities. We understand that that is a necessary prerequisite here in Poland and in other countries. But we believe with Galvion, with the advanced materials and helmets and electronic equipment we spoke of, we think we can collaborate very easily with Polish military, Polish government, and Polish state factories if those types of equipment are demanded by the Polish military.
Now, just expanding on that last point of people understanding that there is a requirement to spend more on the military. We saw that in the 1980s, where there was, I suppose we could say, the kind of the culmination of the Cold War, where military spending on one side and the other was getting higher and higher. At a certain point, the Soviet Union broke. Mm-hmm. They couldn't keep it up anymore. Could that happen again this time, or is there bigger backers behind the scenes there?
I'm not sure I'm sufficiently aware to answer the latter part of that question in terms of the bigger backers question. But I think there is a point of inflection here, which is, although as we've seen in Ukraine, mass, i.e. the ability to generate lots of soldiers, lots of equipment, is still important. That is now gaining much more balance than the Cold War period, where it was all about mass. It is getting much more balance now with the quality of the equipment, the quality of the digital networks that support that, and therefore the creation of advanced technologically based military capability. So the individual soldier will always be at the core of this, whether he be an infantryman, whether he be a tank crew member, flying a fast jet, or any other military capability. But there is now, I think, a much deeper drive to balance, frankly, a more expensive, technologically based army that can effectively fight more effectively and fight in this dislocated battlefield where protection comes through dispersion, protection comes through traditional technologies, cover and concealment, electronic concealment, and the ability then to bring those capabilities together quickly to defeat a particular enemy threat. Those balances are now much more significant than the Cold War days. And even in my days, in those early days in the British Army in those days was significantly larger than it is today. But there remains a question now of, yes, we still need to generate some mass in a peer-on-peer conflict with a country such as Russia, but it isn't anymore a simple equation of he who has more bangs and bullets wins. It's now how much you are able to exploit the depth of information that is now visible on the battlefield or visible through digital communication networks to then make faster, more effective decisions and therefore defeat the enemy's ability to defeat you. So it's a balance.
Peter Rafferty, it's been really great talking to you. I think that we could probably go on all day. But thanks very much for joining us here on Poland Today.
David, thank you very much. I really appreciate this chance to chat with you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. And of course, remember, subscribe to Poland Today and keep on watching. Thank you very much.